Hello everyone, welcome to yet another video in this, the clown decade. The decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you wanted even more proof that the BBC licence fee is a fee you should never pay, and one that I am thankfully no longer in a household that is paying it, just look no further than the song that Horrible Histories made just over a year ago, titled Been Here From the Start, featuring a black man, which was a feature for Black British history. And we are going to ignore the 75 years of the NHS song that is directly below it. That is for another video. I really don't think we need to go into any further introductions. Let's just see what they have to say in the song. So already I know I'm going to have to just repeat everything that is being said or sang in this video, because whoever did the music mixing for this song just did a terrible job. Can barely hear the man who's actually singing. That is supposed to be the main part you can hear in a song. The lyrics are very important when it comes to non-instrumental music. However, apparently we are going to be given some great news. So let's hear what this news is. We may not have been told, but they have been here from the start. If you were to just take this at face value, you would think all cavemen were black in Britain and all Roman soldiers were also black in Britain. I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand the point of the song is to try and push the narrative that there have always been black people in Britain, but as we are going to go through, that's not actually true. So, let's take a look. I'm already really annoyed at the fact I just cannot hear the lyrics to this. I have no idea what he said. I went to the YouTube video to put the captions on to see what was just said there about the Georgian-looking man. And as you can see here, all it says is music. So I'm glad that I'm not paying a BBC licence fee to make such awful, awful music where I can't even understand what they're saying. This is supposed to be an educational song, by the way. Can't even hear the educational part of it. But let's just take what they are saying as Black Britons have always been in Britain. They've been there from the Stone Age, even up to, of course, the present day, and even in places where you barely see black people, such as stories from the Georgian Age, or the Victorian Age, or pretty much any other age, because it was very rare to see black people throughout history from before about the 1960s. For these Isles of British and black people played their part. I get the feeling we're going to have to talk about Windrush at some point here, because all you can really say about black people before Windrush was there were maybe one or two of note, and when it comes to the grand scale of things, their input in, say, the Industrial Revolution or the Empire was negligible. As Enoch Powell says, really the Empire was an Indo-British Empire. When it came to the Empire, it was everything between the UK and India, or it was everything beyond India. That's generally how people saw it, because India was the jewel of the crown, and Britain was the place of mass industrial revolution. Does that mean there were no black people whatsoever? No, that is absolutely not what I'm saying. However, as we will go through, this is trying to make out that black people were the keystone into making Britain great. We are going to be critiquing that. Strike one, BBC. The people who did this DNA study had to come out and say we can't conclusively say that he has got black skin. It is just specific current research going on that came out with the results that he had black to dark skin. As Susan Walsh says, who was the researcher for Cheddarman's DNA and skin colour from Indiana University, says, she stresses that the study does not conclusively demonstrate Cheddarman had black to dark skin, and we cannot place such confidence in DNA analysis. For one thing, Cheddarman's DNA is degraded over the last 10,000 years, and it's not a simple statement of this person was dark-skinned, it is his most probable profile based on current research, and in fact we're not ready to predict skin colour of prehistoric people just from their genes, says Brenna Henn at Stony Brook University, New York. That's because the genetics of skin pigmentation turn out to be more complex than we once thought. It goes on to say that after her colleagues published a paper exploring the genetics of skin pigmentation in populations indigenous to southern Africa, where skin colour varies more than many people appreciate, just weeks before, a group led by Sarah Tishkoff at the University of Pennsylvania has published a paper on the genetics of skin pigmentation in people from eastern and southern Africa. And the conclusions were really the same, says Henn. Known skin pigmentation genes discovered primarily in East Asia and European populations don't explain the variation in skin pigmentation in African populations. The idea that there are only really about 15 genes underlying skin pigmentation isn't correct. And in fact, if we look at truly independent minds, and thank God for Quora and the internet in general, this is a rather large post on Quora that starts off with, "I'm a British scientist with autism, meaning I have no sense of social self-preservation, unlocking my full cognitive potential, and I've not only peer-reviewed the original and found it to be false, but can easily prove it wrong." And to make a long post very short, this is a picture that the peer-reviewed study shows as a general composition of Cheddar Man. This is a picture of the original poster putting his own DNA through the same model. As you can see very clearly, half black, blonde hair, very, very blue eyes. Quite a unique looking man. Anyway, this is what he really looks like. Clearly, very dark brown eyes, kind of blonde hair, with light eyebrows, and given the lighting here is not the greatest, he quite clearly has very pale skin. In other words, the model they were using, it's pretty bad for predicting your skin colour. Hence, actual researchers and apparently internet autists have made it quite clear he probably isn't black, or at the very best, we can't actually be certain of what his skin colour is. And the reason I say that he probably wasn't black is because, well, in northern latitudes, we need paler skin to get that vitamin D. It's either that or he was drinking an absurd amount of milk. And in fact, they found a living relative of Cheddar Man. He lived half a mile away from where Cheddar Man was found. And seriously, if they made Cheddar Man's model here white, it would be an uncanny resemblance. They would look almost exactly the same. It's actually quite impressive how... It's actually amazing how close these genetics are. And don't get me wrong, I understand that these things like skin pigmentation can evolve over time. However, when the description is dark to black skin, they went for the darkest shade they could with this model. So thanks to all this scientific research and the fact we've literally found a living relative who doesn't look like he even tans, yeah, this is why so many people are skeptical that Cheddar Man was indeed black, like one piece of research that isn't even confident in its own work says. So for the BBC to push as fact that Cheddar Man was indeed a black Briton, that is very much inaccurate, and hence it is strike one. Let's see if they fall into any other traps. Well, that's strike 2 and 3. I guess we should start on the left here with Septimus Severus. Now, most Blacktivists will take a look at this one surviving picture or portrait of Septimus Severus and his family here. Clearly, he is darker skinned than the rest of his family, his wife being of Syrian origin, who are fairly pale skinned. Septimus had a Roman mother and a Punic or North African father, who will have looked slightly darker than your average Roman, and obviously Septimus probably took on that slightly more dark-skinned appearance. However, this is not the typically sub-Saharan African black that you would be expecting, or that the BBC are trying to push. And in fact, no descriptions of Septimus describe him as black, and with the bust that I have put on screen, he clearly has sharp Roman features. And as mentioned before, because his father was of Punic origin, he probably did have slightly darker skin than your average Roman. But given there are no surviving records describing him as black, and the only coloured picture we have doesn't show him as dark-skinned as the activist scientist made Cheddar Man, we can assume that he was indeed not black. Now, onto the Moors of Hadrian's Wall. Now, it is quite well established that there was one unit known to be from North Africa that was recorded on Hadrian's Wall, and was based at the fort of Bur by Sands in Cumbria. It was called the Numerus Mamorum Aurelianorum, or the unit of Aurelian Moors. That was formed in the northwest Africa in the area of Algeria or Morocco today. It suggests that it was raised in the late 2nd century AD during the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. It is believed that it was based at Bur by Sands through the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, and thanks to the BBC they've got a little plaque saying the first recorded African community in Britain guarded a Roman fort on this site. Which is technically true, which is fine, but it's just that the underlying implication of this, as has been made explicit in fact by this very song, it is that these Moors were black or sub-Saharan African. The reality is that they were not. as Moors is simply an archaic term to designate a Muslim population of the Maghreb, Al-Andalus, Sicily and Malta regions during the Middle Ages and, of course, before. They're not a single or distinct self-defined people. It was simply a term used by Europeans to describe people from North Africa and some areas of Europe as they were having Islamic jihads throughout southern Europe. Now, obviously, in Roman times, this was before Muslims were a thing, given that Muhammad wasn't even born yet. But as shown from absolutely every single picture in this Wikipedia article, the type of people it is describing from North Africa, they're clearly not black. So we've had maybe 3 or 4 lines of lyrics in this entire song so far, and it has been absolutely saturated with lies. And just from this line of the song alone, this makes it even more annoying that they're trying to push this, because it's, oh, black people played their part in British history. And so even from that line where it describes them as visitors for a foreign empire, it's kind of hard for anyone to say that they played a good part in British history, given that, let's face it, the reason that the Moors were there, and we know for definite the reason that Septimus came to Britain, was to conquer Scotland. And yet you would probably hear the BBC try and claim that, oh, black people only ever played a good part in Scottish history. Well, apparently they played a part in the Roman Empire to try and invade Scotland, so I don't know how you're going to square that circle, but I'd love to see you try. And in fact, the specific line is just a few of several who walked upon these shores. This is making it quite clear that they didn't really have a big part in British history anyway. They were a few, they were a footnote, they didn't do much, and certainly weren't representative of the population at large. So you are, 1, lying about these people, and then 2, admitting that they really didn't play a big part anyway, so why make this song? Finally we get to someone who was undisputably black and sub-Saharan African. However, according to all records, we have absolutely no idea where John Blanc came from or how he even got to Britain. It is just simply assumed at this point that he came over from Spain with Catherine of Aragon. So at least we're getting actual black people now in this song, but it is 1 trumpeter, and it was quite common throughout Europe to have 1 token trumpeter, to be quite frank. It seemed to be a style thing. But I do find it incredibly interesting that you've gone from pre-history to the Roman times, admitted that the Romans were visitors, and somehow you have absolutely no examples of any black people being here from between about 300 AD to 1500 AD. How do you account for no black people being here for 1,200 years? It's almost like when you say you were here from the start, you were either kicked out or, my god, we had an awful lot of racist historians in Britain for 1,200 years. Catalina of Montreal was an enslaved Moorish royal bedchamber servant. Once again, we are conflating Moorish people, i.e. people with slightly darker skin than the Spanish, to sub-Saharan black people. How do I know they are conflating them? Because this is the picture they are using for a Moorish Catalina of Montreal. There's no hiding it, there's no getting away from it, that is what they are conflating. But also, after he describes Catalina as black in the song, I can't quite tell what he's saying because the music's terrible. But I think he says, in the history books they don't. Which is just, again, a complete misrepresentation of what the history books say. They don't say that Henry VIII had a black trumpeter and a Moorish bedmaid, or bedservant, named Catalina, because who the hell cares? You go all the way throughout history, the only time that any bed servant's name will be mentioned, or a trumpeter will be mentioned, is any time they had any part to play in any sort of major historical event. In fact, because of this push by a load of blacktivists and academics, the only trumpeter and bedmaid that we even know the names of are these 2 people. Because they're the only damn bedmaids and trumpeters that anyone ever talks about, because they were black, or even in Caitlyn's case, just darker skinned than the rest of the country. Like, yeah, he played his part. How did he play his part? Oh, he played trumpet for King Henry VIII, as literally hundreds of other people did. Oh, how did he get here? Oh, he came over with Catherine of Aragon. Right, so again, this was someone who could be described as a visitor. Again, you've still got 1,200 years of history that you're just not accounting for. Where were the black people? For God's sake. You know, for a song that's supposed to be somewhat educational, I have no idea who these people are. I'm just going to have to take his word that indeed black, naked children's writers, I think that's how he described this man. No idea who he is. I've tried to have a quick Google search for black children's writers in history in Britain, not coming up with a whole lot, so I just don't know who he's talking about, but hey, we'll take his word for it. And then the star of boxing rings. Again, I don't know who this person they are describing is. You would have thought they would have gone in a bit more detail to try and prove the point that they played their part, but the fact I can't even find anything on Google screams volumes to me that they played their part in about the same way as 99% of people throughout Britain have played their part. In that at best, they are footnotes of history or just one of many statistics throughout history. Yeah, finally, some things that we cannot dispute at all, which finally some good history, some good education. Yes, indeed, there were black British people fighting on the battlefields of Europe, and indeed, the Empire Windrush, along with other boats that cruised people over from Jamaica, did indeed introduce a bunch of black people to the UK. You are finally getting to the point where we can say that this is true. This is where black people in general were playing their part. But the fact that you've got through more than half this song of just either outright lies or complete misrepresentations of how people could actually describe themselves and how others did describe them in history is just ridiculous. And it just goes to show how far this intersectional ideology has gone. Because when it comes down to it, yeah, immigrants are on the progressive stack, but really the only race that has any value on the progressive stack is black people, and they need to push that all black people are always in Britain as a narrative, because it's just part of this whole demoralization thing. Oh, your identity and the patterns you have seen throughout your own history and that you see in your own life, they're all completely wrong. You have to not trust your lying eyes. And the thing is that I'm the type of person that I just don't care about race. I don't care what colour you are, just don't be a nasty piece of work. But to be quite honest with you, if you are making an entire song and trying to indoctrinate kids into thinking that black people are always here, then that is you being a nasty piece of work. Because, again, I don't really care whether black people were here from the start or not. I really don't. I just care about the truth, and if you have to actively lie in your children's shows about things like this, then I'm obviously going to criticise it, and I'm obviously going to kick up a fuss and make this video informing people that, in fact, your song is completely false. Well, not completely false, as I've just said. There's a couple of true things in there. But my God, they are essentially just nuggets of truth compared to the rest of these lies. So you can be damn sure that I will be making a complaint to the BBC about this song. I don't care that it's over a year old. I just care that the BBC are consistently putting out this nonsense at the expense of the people whose history they are deciding to degrade. So thanks for that, BBC. Thank God I don't pay the licence fee. I mean, this is just amazing when you think about it. They've gone through 5 specific examples throughout the past, which as we have gone through, I think one turned out to be truly black. And I'm taking his word for it that the other 2 further examples of specific people he was talking about were indeed black and British. They also looked like they were from the Georgian period and beyond. But then when he can finally go around to saying that there were more than just individual black people in Britain or fighting for Britain, he uses World War I and II as the example, and then of course the Windrush, i.e. everything that has happened in the 20th century. But this is the thing, they've now run out of examples and are now just singing about history in general, saying how awful isn't it that we've suppressed all these little bits of historical nuggets of truth, which just isn't true. It's not that they've been suppressed, it's just that they played such a small part in history that just no one cares. You know, we know that Henry VIII had a trumpeter and he was called John Black. Nobody cared until there were a bunch of black activists coming about trying to push that Britons were always black. Because this is just the thin end of the wedge for something like this. For the BBC to push something like a black king of Anglo-Saxon England, King Offa. The book King Offa is a non-fictional historical account based on true characters, facts and events in the life of King Offa. You should be curious and eager to delve into the account of King Offa, who was one of many black African Anglo-Saxon rulers of England. Black African Anglo-Saxon. You either choose one or the other. You can't have a black African who is also an Anglo-Saxon. That unless they're mixed race. But that's just not a thing. That will have happened. King Offa was not a black African. I don't even know how they can say something like that. But it goes on in the last paragraph to say, for young people studying black history, this book is an excellent learning and teaching aid. It provides images and true life accounts of black people in Anglo-Saxon England, apparently even the African kings of Britain. Throughout the book, suggested project assignments are incorporated to further stimulate the reader's minds, to increase their understanding of the extent of our black history. The book also encourages and inspires young people to undertake their own research into their hidden black history. And this is the same thing that this song is arguing about. It is arguing that history has indeed suppressed things such as a black King Offa. It has suppressed things such as Cheddar Man was actually black, when in reality, we don't know what his skin colour was. And again, just to make it very clear, I would not care if this was true. I would not care if King Offa was indeed black. I just know it's not true at all. And the problem I have with the BBC pushing a song like this is that if there's no pushback to it, and not enough people in charge of horrible histories push back on it, they will probably unironically make a show that claims that King Offa was black. Despite the fact that he had very specific Anglo-Saxon ancestry, he was never described as black, and there is absolutely no records whatsoever that even suggest that him or any of his parents or ancestry came from Africa. At least not within a timescale that matters. So this is why I'm getting so passionate about this and going into such detail about this, because I need the BBC and all of you, of course, to understand just how wrong they are, to make sure that they don't keep making false statements and make more and more false statements until they eventually try and say that all our kings were black. Because absolutely none of them were. Again, this lyric, I don't have a problem with it. It's not untrue that in British history there were some black people. The thing is that they really, really weren't noticeable and didn't have a large cohort since post-Windrush. In Empire days, barely any of them came over to Britain. There was no point whatsoever, because it will have cost far too much for a risk that they didn't know if they could take. You know, they had their own lands that we just ruled, and they were happy to stay in them. And if there was any emigration throughout the Empire, it was British people moving out of Britain to see the New World and try and make a new life in the New World, whether that be America, Australia, India, or anywhere else that we had conquered. And when it came to non-British natives, a good example is some of the Indians. You know, the British Empire offered them jobs in, say, Kenya or other African colonies to run the administration there. And that's the main way you'd see immigrants moving about within the Empire. There was actually barely any migration directly to Britain from outside it. But I want to make it clear that, again, it's not like there were no black people in British history. It's just that the vast, vast majority of them, and in fact probably exclusively all the important ones, we see from kind of the late Victorian time through to obviously the Windrush. That's when it was, high status black people and they were few and far between. But then you get to Windrush, boom, you get tens of thousands of them. And that's why this song then ends with this. I mean, I think that genuinely does make it slightly worse, because both Stormzy and Marcus Rashford, they do push the, for lack of a better term, Black Lives Matter narrative. In black people have always been oppressed in England and Britain is just institutionally racist, despite the fact that both of them are millionaires. And they seem to have no positive vision for Britain in general that doesn't include, for lack of a better term, giving the whip hand over to the black man. Despite the fact that I think there's a good chance that Kemi Badenoch is going to be Prime Minister at some point, you're not seeing this song saying, oh, our future lies within Kemi Badenoch or anyone like that, because, to be fair, one, not many kids will probably know who Kemi Badenoch is, but a much more applicable reason that they're not going to say someone like that is because, as we all know, the BBC does institutionally lean left-wing and is institutionally in favour of Black Lives Matter. So that's why it's two people who are very open about their support of Black Lives Matter that they've chosen for examples in this song. I would absolutely love someone in the comments to let me know what they said there, because again, I just cannot tell what they said. I've not really got anything to comment on here. They're right, there are a lot of black people here now, and should intersectionality still be the mainstream high status ideology that is being pushed, then yeah, the way forward probably is going to be lighted by people like Stormzy and Marcus Rashford, who, as I said before, they're of course just going to keep going along with the ideology that is being espoused by high status people, because they are themselves high status people, and consequences be damned, because no one they know and they themselves are not going to have to suffer any of the consequences of pushing this sort of thing. But anyway, they go into a chorus again after that, and it's the end of the song. There's nothing else really to comment on. But what can I conclude apart from there were a whole bunch of lies in that song, and they're trying to claim that their history has been suppressed, when it hasn't. It simply just doesn't exist. And I do mean that. In the majority of the examples that they put forward in this video, there was no black history there, frankly. And I obviously do hate that term anyway. I would much rather just call it British history, and people we know that were generally described as being black just say, yeah, they were described as being black, and it was odd for the time. Because it is odd for the time. It's still technically odd for the time now. The majority is still British white people throughout Britain. Obviously not in London, so maybe we can start saying that London is representative of black history, I don't know. But when it comes down to it, this entire song is to try and make kids think that mass immigration never really happened. Despite the fact, as mentioned, they jump ridiculous timescales. It goes from prehistory and Roman times to two examples in the Tudor times, who both, by the way, came over from Spain. One of them wasn't even black, and of course the examples from prehistory and in the Roman times, they weren't black either, or at least obviously in the prehistory case, we have no conclusive evidence they were black. But then they go from Tudor times to, what, an example of someone they didn't even name in the Georgian times, and then a couple of Victorian examples. And then they can really make a push for actual, true, large amounts of black people being present in British history in the 20th century and beyond. But it's been made clear from this song they are not differentiating that here. They are implying that the amount of black people that entered the country via Windrush, it was absolutely had no effect on the demographics of the country whatsoever. It was just, oh, look, it's more black people than were already here. That's not a problem at all. And how could you possibly even try and make that case if all you have to do is bring up Enoch Powell's Birmingham speech, where he explains people are noticing the issues with mass immigration? Well, the reason is because that's when mass immigration started. But anyway, that's, no surprises here. That's what the BBC are pushing. We've known for quite a while that has been the way that they're inclined, and still blows my mind that people say that the BBC is institutionally right-wing. In reality, they lean left-liberal and are obviously globalist, as proved here. And if you call that right-wing, you are either not politically engaged or just not seeing the facts in the face for what they are. But anyway, I hope you found this video very educational. Obviously, if your kids ask any questions about Black British history, this video has probably given you some information that you can use to say, well, Black history wasn't really a thing until the 20th century when it came to Britain, outside of very, very isolated cases. But there you go. Well, as I said, that's everything we have for you today. So, once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.